How to Deal When the Shit Gets Real podcast. I'm Rietta, and today I am here with Grace Williams. So, Grace, how do you deal when shit gets real? Or just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Grace Williams. I am just outside Philadelphia celebrating the Eagles' big Super Bowl win. And I
Yay!
am a mom of two littles and lots of bonus grown kids. And when shit gets real, I honestly dive deep into my self love tools, which have been my lifesaver the last 5 or 6 years.
Well, first off, I love that you started just straight with self love because I think a lot of us forget about self love. So, super important. And I love that you do that.
I do. It's honestly, it has been the biggest message that I feel like I'm here to bring to the world because it's something I didn't learn until I was easily in my 40s.
Yeah, that's a little wild to get the message, but based on what I've read, and I'm sure you're going to fill me in, you've had quite the journey. So let's just start at the beginning. You said you had 8 siblings and you lived in a very religious home. What was it like?
Sure. So when I was born, there were 8 of us in the house with mom and dad. My oldest brother was 18, so he promptly moved out, and then the other two kind of followed quickly after him. So the bulk of my upbringing was in the house with my mom as a single mom. By the time I was 4, preschool age, my dad had gone, and they never got back together, which was always my life. It also didn't fit really well in a religious environment that I grew up in. So I always felt like a little bit like our family was different, but for me, it felt good and normal. We had, I have 4 brothers, 3 sisters. My mom had multiple other pregnancies, but they were well before I was even born. And it's like almost like my family is in two timelines, the one before me and my brother and sister who are closest in age to me, and then the one after the 3 of us came along. So, but ultimately, it felt like growing up with a very religious single mom and a house full of girls, and my one brother who graciously, learned and did all the things that we experienced because it was all around him all the time. But the religious side of it was that as a kid, I didn't really understand so many of the rules that we lived by. And as I got older, I sort of like wanted to branch out and experience more. And I was drawn to something different. And that was kind of my journey started as a young adult. But I remember looking back like that older elementary, middle school age, I started feeling that desire to like, I feel like there's more than this box.
Mhm. Was it kind of hard because you kind of mentioned that there was 2 timelines. Was it kind of did it feel like your family was kind of split? Was it hard to have those like 2 different families almost?
Yeah, it was interesting. Like at the time it felt normal, but looking back, well, first off, when my mom got sick 2 years ago, and we all had to sort of converge and help take care of her 24/7, my sister and I came to the point where we were like, we thought we were the only ones traumatized, but y'all are a hot mess. So, but in a loving way, like we've been putting in the work on our own that we were like kind of hit a roadblock and we were like, wow, we didn't realize how much everyone experienced. And my father was very abusive to my mother. So my older siblings, they have this life like this very, and maybe I'm dating myself, but like Ward and June Cleaver, like I looked at
Mhm.
videos that his family had put together from when the kids were all little, and it was like it was like watching a TV show because that was never my life. Like I have very few early memories where he was even around.
Mhm.
But over time, that changed and he became very abusive to my mom. And so my siblings experienced that like knee deep in a way that I'm super grateful that I didn't because I realized just how hard that was for them and how much trauma, not to make it sound cliche, but how much trauma they really watched in their own home and experienced. And, God bless them because now, like, they're navigating life as best they can. And while we don't always see eye to eye and make the same life, you know, not really walking the same life path, I look at them and I go, like, but look at you raising your kids differently. Look at you loving your spouses differently. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I realize this probably is kind of a hard question, but there something that happened that changed your dad that he suddenly became so abusive?
To be honest with you, I think it was just, I don't really know, but I do know that my mom always pinpointed it to in the course of 1 year, he was very religious, like super, like devoted, not just for the rules of it, but really believed everything that he was saying and doing. And in the course of 1 year, he lost his mom in a car accident, his dad to a heart attack, and a brother that I don't recall because he died years before I was ever born. He was hit by a drunk driver years before, like, Mothers Against Drunk Driving was even a thing. And my mom always kind of pinpointed that as like a turning point where I think maybe he just looked like, God, how could you?
Mhm.
But he never talked about it. And I didn't have a relationship with him. So I don't really know deep down if that's what it was, but I feel like she had a pretty good handle on him. And she
Mhm.
also had a pretty good handle on her own faith and spirituality to be able to look at something and go like, that might put me over the edge. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Have you ever had a relationship with your dad, or has it just been totally
No, I made attempts when I was a kid. I feel like I was sort of, my perspective of my dad was, if you weren't a boy and if you weren't bearing babies for grandchildren, you weren't really useful. So
oof?
at the time, I had four brothers and one sister who had children. The other three of us were like, who are you? So and I can laugh at it now, but it was really painful at the time. I really, really wanted, growing up as like elementary, middle school, I didn't really want that relationship with my dad. But in high school, I had two really close friends, and I just thought their relationships with their dad, who were the strictest dads in the school, by the way. But I just thought their relationships with their dads were so freaking cool. And I was like, I don't have that. I can't have it. And I tried to pursue it, and it just, he didn't reciprocate, and I was hurt and bitter for a long
Of
time.
course.
And then as I grew older, I just, I realized that like that's a him thing and not a me thing. And ultimately, as I really grew older and matured and learned about loving myself, I was like, he really missed out, because I don't know if I can cuss on here, but I was
Yes,
pretty
you
fucking
can.
awesome. So, and I looking back, I have that mindset, but I absolutely didn't have it in the moment for so many years.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely his loss, right? He made that was a choice he made. So, but I'm sure that was hard, but I'm glad that you found a way to cope with it and
Yeah.
accept it, if you will. Is religion still a part of your life, or have you chosen to kind of step away from it?
I stepped away from it when my kids were through the course of my pregnancy. I met my husband, and 2 years in, we weren't married. We bought a house together, made a life together, and I got pregnant. And at the time, I was leading at like a middle school youth group, and it wasn't really conducive. Like, I didn't wait for them to say you need to go. I just kind of called the leader one day when I was desperately ill, because I had hyperemesis, which
Mhm.
is really debilitating. Like the first trimester, depending on who you are, could go longer. And I had to, like, literally, I was at the hospital on a day when I was supposed to be like driving the group somewhere. And I just had to call them and say, like, this is where I am today. And I'm gonna guess when you present this to like the powers that be, they're probably not gonna want me there. So I'm just gonna bow out now because I'm too sick anyway. So I feel like I didn't really give them the chance to show me who they were. I kind of made an assumption who they were and stepped back myself. But through that, I was in a space where I thought the church that I was attending at the time was different. It was more progressive, more open, more, just so much more loving and community oriented. But ultimately, when I disappeared because I was sick, like, nobody that I was really working closely with or spending time with reached out to go like, "Hey, are you okay?" And for me, I was like, that it doesn't really work for me. And that came on
Mhm.
the heels of being in an abusive marriage for 6 years. It was in and out, but ultimately 6, 7 years. And I was in a very much more conservative church, very similar to what I grew up with. And that really started me on the path of like, this isn't this isn't a place that's going to nurture me. And I'm not saying that every church in America, particularly, is a place that won't nurture you. But from my experience, the very conservative group I was in was not a place to be nurtured. It was a place to perform, follow the rules, do the thing. And my life was on the line, and I couldn't mesh those two things. So
Mhm.
I stepped away there and moved to something that I felt was more progressive. But looking back, it was just a more diluted version of what I kind of started out with. And I was really bitter and lonely and abandoned for a while because, my choices, and feel free to stop me at any point because I could just go on all day, but my choices were very different. I did a lot of internal, like, checking myself, soul searching. What do I really want? Who really am I? And my choices were very different than the expectation of all
Mhm.
the people that I was in close relationships with, to the point where when I met my husband, he sort of kept checking, are you good? Like, are you sure this is a good time for you? And I was like, yeah, like, I'm good. Like, they might not all be, but I'm good. And I felt really abandoned. I had a family member sort of shove a Bible at me when I moved in with my husband, who I'm with now, and say, like, tell me where in there what you're doing, something you ought to be doing. And I sort of politely nudged it back and said, like, that's between me and God, not me and you. I had a family member call me and say, I want to help you out of this sinful relationship. And not one of them picked up the phone to say, you're in an abusive marriage. I see you dim. I see you hurting. I see you scared to death. How can I help you out of it? Not one of them reached out in those 6, 7 years to do that for someone who was hurting and abused. But when I was finally stepping into a happy, healthy place years later, all they could do was come at me and tell me how wrong it was. And that at that point, I was just like, I can't step back into organized religion right now. I need a break. And I did take a break for a long time, and sort of like arm's length for everything that just even had like a slightest aroma of religion that would be organized and possibly judgmental. And it's only through like communities that I've like participated in and created on my own over the last few years that I've opened the door to myself to, like, what was spirituality before people put religious rules on it? So I'm not religious. I I have a lot of ingrained beliefs that I've just peeled away and pulled apart over the years. And with the very small exception of, there is something so much bigger than us out there, and love other people. Like, those were my two biggest takeaways from the religion I was raised in, because that was always like the one like piece of biblical scripture that I would hold on to was like, love God, love others. Like, nothing else is important. And in the midst of all that, those things rang in my ears. And when I kind of opened myself to, like, okay, I'd be willing to explore spirituality, but it can't look like a Sunday morning church service for me. So I'm kind of in that exploring and learning and researching what was and what is for the people, hearing their experiences so that I can sort of understand something different than what was kind of thrown at me my whole life.
No, and good for you for breaking free of it, and, I mean, that's very telling that you were in an abusive relationship and nobody was there to be like, "Have you maybe thought that you're not in the right place?" But
Right.
then when you move forward, then they have all the things to say, like,
Yeah.
that makes me sad for you.
Yeah. And it made me so sad for my husband because he's really fucking awesome. He's such a good guy. He's just so kind. And I turned around to one of them one day, and he he has his own religious beliefs, which are nothing like what I was raised with. And I turned around and I'm like, he doesn't even believe in Jesus, but he's nicer than everybody I know who does. Like, why don't you guys back off and learn from him?
I mean, it all goes back to what we talked about even before we hit record that, if we just led with love and did things with love,
Yeah.
things would look very, very differently.
Yes. And that's my faith and spirituality are right now, is just like, how can I First of all, I know people always say you can't pour from an empty cup, but my perspective is so much of my life was you're not worthy, but you're not worthy, but you're not good enough. You're never going to please God, but he loves you anyway. And for me, it's like, no, I'm worthy. I'm beautiful. I'm kind, I'm generous. Like I can tell you all the things about me, but what's important is that I know it and I believe it. And then, yes, I know it and I believe it. And it's okay to stop there. But because I now know it and believe it, I am a better wife. I'm a better mom. I'm a better friend, employee, sister, business owner. Like those things are flowing out of me. So I'm not pouring out. I heard somebody share this on Instagram recently. It was like, it's not about pouring. Like your cup's not there to actively pour. The point is to be so full that it just flows out of you to the people around you.
Yeah, it just
And
overflows. Yep.
yeah, and for me right now, that's where my spirituality is making sure that I'm in such a beautiful space in my life that when you come in contact with me, I hope that I'm making yours better.
Yeah, and that's a lot harder than you made it sound. I mean, they always say that it takes 100 data girls to make up for one.
Yes.
You're terrible. So the fact that you were able to come out of that after years and years of crap, to put it lightly, is amazing in and of itself.
Yeah, and it did. I mean, it wasn't overnight. And it, frankly, at first, it wasn't when I really started to dive deep, it wasn't even for me. It was really because I had two littles, and they were, I think, like probably toddler preschool at the time. Now they're teenagers. And I
Mhm.
just, like, I wanted to, as playful as I was when I was like sitting on the floor in those quiet moments with them, like that's how I wanted it to be all the time. But I had all this stress and
Mhm.
I was just such a hot mess and so many layers of junk to peel away. And I was like, I just want to feel abundant. Like, how do I do that? And I just
Mhm.
started Googling it. But it wasn't even for me that I started, but I found what I needed in trying to meet what they needed.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, isn't it?
So you were in this abusive relationship like you mentioned. How did you finally find the courage to leave, and what advice would you give others that may be thinking about it?
Wow. Yeah. I left so many times, which at the time I felt so inadequate and so incapable. Looking back, I was carrying us, but at the time I didn't feel like it. And when I say that, I mean like financially, operationally, like making sure the bills get paid, making sure the house gets clean, the groceries are there. But I didn't feel like I could do this on my own. I left so many times, and I felt each time I left, I felt like two things. One, a little bit stronger than last time, but when I went back, just like a little bit more pissed off at myself. Like, damn, why couldn't you do that? And it was almost like I would beat myself up over it. But I also realized that I didn't really have the support. My religious leader was saying, go back, like you're in the wrong space. My mom left an abusive marriage, but really kind of kept the door cracked a little for my dad to come back if he ever got himself together. So I didn't really have like a great foundation. And, one day I remember sitting on the phone with my mom and saying, on the phone, like right before smartphones and texting all the time. And I just said, I just want somebody to tell me what I'm supposed to do. And she was just like, honey, nobody can do that for you. And
Mhm.
that's where I was like, I have to figure this out for myself. And I didn't immediately, but I feel like that was the start of me really like setting some healthy boundaries. We were separated at the time. I remember I had my own apartment, and it may be stupid, but at that point, I felt like I was in control in that I only allowed him in where I felt comfortable. At the time, he only came to my house because I was opening the door for a Bible study every week. And I didn't want to fight with him with all those people there. So I would just let him come in and sit in the Bible study. So it was like things like that. Like looking back, at the time I felt so stupid each encounter, but I also realized that each encounter, even though it didn't have the outcome of like stepping on my own, saving myself, it was like one step closer, just one step closer. And I think the the thing that finally put me to going like I can't with you anymore was that he he had the key to my house still. He hadn't used it, but apparently he was there hanging out one day, waiting for me to get home from work. And when I got home, I was like, "What? Like, you don't belong here. Give me my key. You need to leave." And then I found a bag with like a little plastic bag that had like drugs in it. They were empty. And my niece, who was like the most straight laced 21-year-old you could ever imagine, I left her and her like six best friends in my apartment New Year's weekend. Didn't call them, didn't check in on them, and none of them drank. Like they were all super straight laced. They all went to bed at a reasonable hour. My apartment looked beautiful when I got home. Like he turned around and was like, "Oh, that must be hers," and I was like, oh, "Okay, you're in a delusional place, and I am now no longer in that place with you. So we're going to cut the boundary." And it sounds so matter of fact, but it took me years to get there. I got married to him in, I think, December of 98. And I didn't completely move out on my own until 2004. And that was still like him in and out communication. And by 2006, I moved in with a family member who was going through a divorce, and she was in a place where she would have had to move school districts for her middle school daughter to be able to stay at her home. I mean, to be able to afford her home alone. So I was
Gotcha.
like, my lease is up. Like, I'm pretty mobile. I don't mind. I'll come live with you guys. And it was great because for me, it like slammed the chapter of ever opening the door for even to him to visit, to try and like there was some part of me all of that time that even though I was trying to save myself, that felt like I was responsible to save him. And that was
Mhm.
very much my religious upbringing. So it kind of closed the door like, this is not your job. This is
Mhm.
someone else's job and not yours. And honestly, those 2.5 years I loved. I lived with my sister, her daughter who was 13, my brother's daughter who was living with me in my apartment moved in with us, and we just had a house full of like just it was such a happy few years. We loved it so much. But as
Oh.
far as like what I would tell somebody, every situation's so different.
Mhm.
But what I would tell someone who's in an abusive situation is this: you deserve all of the beautiful things in life that you can imagine, and even the ones that you think you could never imagine. You deserve to be loved by yourself. You deserve to be treated with kindness and dignity and respect. And that means that if you take a step to put yourself in a place to be treated with kindness and dignity and respect, and you are afraid and you go back to what your brain is telling you is safety and comfort, you still deserve to speak to yourself with kindness and respect, because taking the step gave you some strength that you didn't have before. Even if you go back, now you're a little bit stronger than you were the first time. Because I think sometimes it can feel like, oh, I'm such a failure. I didn't, I boarded with a woman who I didn't know, hoping to like disconnect from all of it. I'm going to tell you, that woman kept her house at 55 degrees.
Oh
It was
no.
cold, and I love cold weather, like cool weather. I was freezing every day. I would wake up and like bundle up in a whole like robe and a hoodie and slippers until I felt warm enough to get ready for work. I lived with at the time. She wasn't even my brother's girlfriend. She was just a friend that he worked with. Now, well, then they got married and had three grown kids now. But she opened her house to me, shared her bed with me. She was like, "All I have is my little couch and a bed, but you can have the other half of my bed as long as you need it." Those like each time when I took a step to do that for myself, someone was there on the other side, and I'm grateful for those someones because none of them in the time that I was going through this said, "Hey, I'm going to be here if you take the step." But it was like, I have my bags, I'm leaving the house, I don't know where to go. So I do go back to the beginning of our conversation where I say that no one said, "Hey, you're in an abusive relationship, you deserve to be out of that," or "This isn't healthy for you." But when I did take the steps to get out, there were some people there who were there for me, and they did kind of help me. Each of those times I went a little farther and a little farther and a little farther. So my advice to other people is just if you go and then go back, don't beat yourself up. just know that you've gained some strength for the next step you need to take.
I I really like that because I think we beat ourselves up about everything,
Uh,
especially women. So it's a good reminder that just because it maybe takes you a little longer,
yeah,
as long as you're not in imminent danger,
yeah.
then that's okay.
There are so many resources out there. I think sometimes when when you're belittled and you're taught that you're not worthy over and over and over again, you start to believe it. But there are so many great resources out there. If you don't know if your job's good enough to support you financially, or how to look for an apartment or a place of your own, or whether your credit's good enough. Like, there are so many great resources out there to be able to help people with that.
That's a good reminder too, because I do think a lot of people get stuck in that where they're like, well, if I leave, I don't have enough money to buy the
Right.
groceries, or I don't have this or don't have that. But yours is a perfect reminder that you had a friend that literally all they had was a bed, and they're like, well, I'll share the half with you though.
Yeah, it was amazing. Like, I was blown away because I hadn't known her that long, and she was just, somebody my brother was getting to know, and it was just like, "Oh, wow, okay. Great.
That's
Thank
so
you."
kind.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a beautiful part of a not so beautiful story, but thank goodness for those little parts.
And there's so much beautiful stuff on the other side of it. That's the part that I'm enjoying now, is that, 20 years on the other side of it now. It's just been amazing, and not all peaches and cream. Like, there's mom
Of
life. I have
course.
teenagers. I have a grown stepdaughter with two littles living in our tiny little house. Like, it's not perfection, but it's beautiful and happy on this side of it.
Well, speaking of that, tell us how you met your now husband and how him and his children's love inspired you to love yourself.
I met him at a time when I was happily single and I wasn't looking for anything.
That's when they say it always happens.
Really does. And his cousin, so the short of it is, because of the married name I had with the first marriage, I'm a singer, and I landed in a choir with the Philly Pops singing at the Kimmel Center in Philadelphia. And just by nature of being a soprano with the last name that started with B, I was seated next to another soprano with the last name started with B. I hadn't sung in a space like that for years. It was like one of those things that was like, I'm gonna get back to something I love. And I remember I have a really good ear, so I would like listen to her because I didn't read music. I totally winged most of what I did. And so I would like listen for her because she was really good, and like, where's she going with these melodies and harmonies? Then I got like comfortable. I would start asking her questions. So we became friends. And through her wedding, her husband, also in the choir back in I think he was a tenor at the time, his cousin was in the wedding. I was in the wedding, and we met like in all the wedding festivities. And they were like 8 years younger than us. Almost everybody else in there was 8 years younger than us. So we kind of connected, like, we're the grown-ups in the room. Because we were in that like mid-30s range. We were kind of done the party stuff. And she was not a party animal, neither was the groom. But all of their like other friends were like whooping it up. And I felt like a mother hen, like keeping them all together. But we met through that. Just kind of like, he was so polite. He was like, Can I have your phone number? And I said, You do? Can I use it? And I'm like, Well, you've used it. Like, we've texted. And I'm like, again, not thinking about dating anybody and he goes, like, No, like, after all the wedding stuff's done, can I use your number? And I said, Did you need something? And he's like, No, to call you, like, to spend time with you. And I was like, Oh, okay, yeah. And we, for most people, like, we met in September, and by December of that year, we were living together, like just moving in together. But for most people on the outside, it was like super quick. For me, I had been out of my marriage for almost 3 years doing my healing work, dabbled in like a date here or there, but not absolutely impressed with anything, and just not my people, and that's fine. And so it's just like every step when we would do something together or toward each other, every step I took toward him felt more like home. And he didn't judge me. I was waffling around on so many things, like relationships, trying to figure things out, there was so much, backlash from me moving in when I wasn't officially married and having babies and all the things that for, you know, the person who was brought up in that religious environment was like, there was a lot of angst. Like, am I going to
Mhm.
lose my community? I did. I lost a lot of my community. Um, my mom loved him. So I think honestly, in the long run, she spent more time with him and the babies after he came into my life. But there was like a little disappointment in her from me not following the path that she thought I would. But
Mhm.
ultimately, she loved him and the way he treats me, how he loves me. She loves our children. And he has other kids that he started having. I joke with him that like you're old enough to be a grandpa. I'm not old enough to be a grandma because you started having kids at 18. I didn't start till I was 36. But somehow, so the littles call me Gigi, and I'm happy with that. But I would never want to take grandma away from their grandmas. And so, we didn't, the girls didn't live with us, but in the time I've gotten to know them over the years, they've just, I love that my daughter, who's our oldest, gets to have big sisters. My
Mhm.
son admitted last week to someone who doesn't know our family that he actually loves being the youngest. He's 13, and he has this whole slew of big sisters who will, you know, try to braid his hair, toss his curls around, tell him he smells, tell him to do this, tell him to do that. But ultimately, he loves how much they love him. And
Aw,
our
I love
grandson
that.
is right between our two kids. So his daughter got pregnant before I knew I was pregnant with our second kiddo.
Mhm.
And they lived with us for a couple of years when they were all like kindergarten age. So our kids have this really great bond with him. That's a little bit, it's funny because the boys like always argue back and forth because my son's an uncle before he was actually born. But they're super close and we're blended in such a beautiful way. And I read, and I'm so sorry because I forget which of his books shared this, but Ta-Nehisi Coates shared his family. And from my very like religious upbringing of supposed to have this and that, to my husband's family who just like they just flung their arms open to me and welcomed me wholeheartedly. Um, and but their family looked so different than mine did. And at
Mhm.
first, I was like, well, is this what we're supposed to be, right? And of
Mhm.
course, it's what we're supposed to be because it's where we are and it's where we're happy and it's where we're thriving. But reading his book helped me really get like a glimpse. He was raised in a very similar way to my husband, just the way the family connected, the aunts and uncles raised each other's kids. And for me, it was like such a cool glimpse into like, I think I get you a little bit better now
Mhm.
because this person who I don't even know, who I totally admire, shared his experience. And my kids, it's been super fun to watch them go from being the little kids in the family, which I'm the youngest, so they were the youngest grandkids, to watching them be, the teenagers playing with the little kids in our family now, and I love it. And my husband will be the first to tell you, like, we don't see eye to eye. When you meet us, you probably don't expect us to be together. I'm super outgoing and sociable, um, yet no one talks to me when we're out in public. He is super quiet and closed off, but everyone talks to him when we're out in public, like strangers at the grocery store. And where for me, I would completely welcome that. And he was like, okay. I come from, I'm a hugger. I'm very affectionate and emotional and verbal about those things. And he's like more reserved. So, like, if you get a
Mhm.
hug out of him, you're pretty freaking awesome. And that's just like how we came to be. And we met through all those wedding events. And years later, we just, here we are turning around, looking back, going, I can't believe our kids are teenagers already.
Time really does fly. I know that's so cliche, but it really does.
It does.
I mean, it's such a beautiful story. I love a good love story. I'm such a sappy romantic, so I love it. Has there been a favorite aspect of your self-love journey?
Um, yeah, learning that I'm creative.
Ooh,
I
I
grew
love
up in a
it.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I grew up in a family of really artistic, like my brothers and sisters have some major artistic talent. My daughter, it definitely skipped their genes to her. My mom's, I don't know whose genes they are, but they got in her, and she's a phenomenal artist. And my artwork was always just like a little bit wonky, a little bit messy. And it was like I'd always find it in the drawer with my mom's like fancy jewelry that she never wore versus out on display. And as a kid, I never really understood that, but now I know it was like she wanted to keep it, but it was also really bad. And I'm okay with that. Um, but I never, like, I used to say things like, my oldest sister was so outgoing. My other sister, the next one in line, is super athletic and was really great at sports and very smart, like ridiculously smart. And the next sister after them is super creative and poetic. And she's actually like the pretty one. Like, I always had these labels and I never gave myself a label. I used to say things like, oh, they got all the talent. And then by the time I came, there wasn't really anything left. And so I would be like, well, music's my thing. But honestly, we all kind of could sing. So technically wasn't. I was just the
Mhm.
only one who pursued it more. But yeah, like coming through my self love journey, I've tried things like a direct sales company that I actually did pretty well at. And I no longer do now. And I loved it at the time. I sang with a band. I recorded backup vocals for that band and like all these things that like I did. And then I started a whole freaking business. Like, and I've been super creative. Like, I'm kind of good at designing graphics and stuff. And those are things like I don't go to craft shows or like where people get together and they're like, come make crafts. No, I will come drink wine or coffee and I will make you all the snacks and hang out, but I'm not making a craft. And I realized through all of this that I'm actually creative. I just told myself the story my whole life that I
Mhm.
wasn't because I was comparing myself to somebody, one, whose journey was a lot farther, right? They were all older than I was, and
Mhm.
two, whose skill sets were different than mine. But I actually like it's pretty fun knowing I'm creative now, and I love coming up with creative things.
There you go. And because you also mentioned it, tell us a little bit more about your business.
I will. I created I used to do Color Street nail strips. And I loved doing, I had a really nice group of customers, and I used to do things like quarterly subscription packs where they would get like surprise nail strips and all these fun things that I would put together. And I paid for like a $10 workshop by or, like somebody who has an amazing subscription box business. She's amazing. I think it's called Framed by Sarah is her business, but I just wanted to learn like how do I do this a little bit better so that when these guys get these packages, they're like, wow. And it was like a 5 day workshop where she would share a video or go live every day for 5 days. And about 3 days in, it was like a light bulb went off. And I was like, women in the world need a self love subscription box. Wait, where did that come from? Like, no. And at the time, I was in a business coaching group, like a little small mastermind for, again, the Color Street stuff I was doing. And I was like, I'm just going to tell them about this because they'll tell me how ridiculous it is. And so that night we had our next call scheduled, and I told them, and they were like, oh my God, that makes so much sense for you. And it literally just came like out of the blue because of the work that I was doing on my own and how much fun I was having creating these little subscriptions for that, direct sales business versus, and then it was like, oh shit, I don't know how to do this. And so
Mhm.
I started just doing tons of research. And I started with researching self love because I was like, if I'm going to help people with it, right? I need to be like all in more than just my personal journey. I have to like big picture this. And the first thing I did was Google the definition because I do this all the time. And today I was working
Good
on,
old Google.
yeah, I was training someone on a legal document. And she was like, now what is this for? And I was like, we're going to Google the word because I forget what the actual meaning is. I learned it like 20 years ago. And I went right to Google, what's the definition? And so that's just how I do things. Like I break it down super small. And so I Googled the definition, like, what is self love? And I'm not even joking. It was about a dozen links that were all negative, selfish, bad perceptions. You're like, basically, if you clicked on any of them, by the time you were done, you were going to be an awful person for trying to love yourself. And
Oh
I
my
was like,
gosh.
how the heck is this? Like, this is crazy. Like, I knew this much of what I had done in my life. How in the world? It took me like a good 12 links before I found anything that said something positive. And I was like, this has to change, like this. And
Yeah.
so I started diving into that and just really understanding like that most women and men believe they want and need love, but don't actually know how to love themselves. And so that's kind of like I dove into the meat of it. And then kind of out of that, I was like, okay, now I think I know some stuff and I think I can help serve people because I didn't want it to just be a box of stuff you open and sit on a shelf. I wanted it to be like really actionable tools. So
Mhm.
that's what everyone, they have fun stuff in them, but everyone has like a little workbook that I create every month. It goes in quarterly, but I create the workbook monthly and send them. And it's just, you dive in, whatever the topic of that month is. And it's, questions, background, science, sometimes resources. It's not like me teaching you. It's me going, hey, here's these people that I've learned it from. And let me tell you all the things that they've taught me. Maybe some of it's going to resonate with you. And I'm loving doing it. I'm having as much fun as my subscribers who are opening their boxes. I'm like super giddy every time I put a box together or every time I like click on ship for that one last thing that's going to go in it. And I'm just loving it. But it really came out of me not even trying to start a business, just trying to like do that one little thing better. And I'm so glad it did.
That is amazing. I love it. For anybody that wants one, where can they get one?
Well, you can get one at lovethosevibes.com. And you can always find me, if I can say, on Instagram. I'm
Mhm.
over there a lot. I share a lot of free self-love tools and resources. And it's at the handles Love Those Vibes box.
Oh, wonderful. And do you have any final advice, just things you want to leave my listeners with?
Just to know that you don't have to wait till shit gets real to really dive in and love yourself. But when shit gets real, having the tools to love yourself is going to carry you through it so, so much better. I can tell you from personal experience.
Well, and thank you for using my title. I appreciate that very much.
I'm like, you said I could curse, so I'm going to use them all now.
Heck yeah. I mean, life's too short, right?
Right,
But
right.
thank you. Thank you so much for being here, Grace.
Thank you so much for having me, Rihanna. So appreciative of you just opening your community and letting me share with them.
So, everybody go get I Love Those Vibes box. And this is how to deal when the shit gets real. I'll see you guys all next episode.